Oh, hello there. Welcome to B-Movie Enema, and I'm your B-Movie proctologist, Jeff Arbuckle. Last week, we took a look at Werewolves on Wheels, and that featured a cult of Satanists that turned a biker's old lady into a cursed werewolf. So, this week, I figure we can mix it up a little bit and still use some of the various concepts in that movie that we have in this movie's title. Instead of Satanists, how about we just go straight for Satan? And instead of having Satan on wheels, let's put him in a nice, stylish, and very sexy pair of high heels. It's cool. It's the 2020s, man. Why not let Satan do whatever it is that makes him feel more comfortable or more confident about himself? Anyway, I want to watch the 1962 bombastic sexploitation classic Satan in High Heels. And for a little taste of what we'll be seeing, I now turn it over to my lovely assistant, Nurse Disembody.
Satan in High Heels stars Meg Miles as Stacy Kane, former burlesque dancer turned singer at a high-class New York City club. There, she becomes the mistress of the club's wealthy owner, but also seduces his son. Tensions rise when her estranged husband comes looking for her and she tries to convince him to commit murder.
All right, thank you, Nurse. Let's talk a little bit about Meg Miles. She was a pinup model and singer from mostly the 50s and 60s, and this is likely pointed to as one of her bigger roles, but she appeared alongside such names like Clint Eastwood in Coogan's Bluff and Sean Connery in The Anderson Tapes. But she spent some time on TV in popular soap operas like All My Children, The Doctors, Search for Tomorrow, and Guiding Light. She passed away in late 2019, and an interesting fact about her is that she had the nickname of Jelly Bean Bones, and I suppose it was based on her birth name of Billie Jean Jones. But if it weren't for IMDb, I would have had no idea that nickname ever existed. But she wasn't just a model and movie actress, but she did a lot of work on stage and was recognized as part of the Tony Awards in Memoriam package in 2020. But we'll talk a little bit more about the music in the next segment, but Meg Miles is also the lead vocalist for the song The Female of the Species, which is a song that even I know, and I hadn't even seen this movie before preparing for this episode. So that's hardly anything to sneeze at. Remember, music expert over here. And we'll come back around to that soundtrack though, because this is a movie that's actually highly regarded specifically for its music. But say, Nurse Disembody, did you ever work at a nightclub?
I don't really want to talk about it.
Well, wait, why not? I mean, like too many jerk customers or something?
No, it's just that I'm not all that proud of the things I had to do to get through school. That's all.
Whoa, now wait a minute there, Nurse. I mean, did you work at a carnival as a burlesque dancer only to end up like moving to New York City to seduce a club owner and his son, only to have an ex-lover or something that that you convinced to try to kill said club owner?
Not exactly all of that, but some of that.
Now we're really going to have to talk about this, but let me in on a little bit more about this super secret backstory that I had no idea even existed until just this moment.
Look, nursing school doesn't pay for itself. Just leave it at that.
All right, I'll tell you what. I'll launch the movie for the audience, and then we'll talk kind of off the record, like off camera and whatnot. Cool? So I'm going to get more to the bottom of this business, but I'll see all of you here in a little bit. So I guess carnivals used to have burlesque shows, right? I've seen multiple movies from the 60s that featured various sexy shenanigans going on at a carnival. But I've never been to a carnival that featured a sexy dancer like Stacy Kane. Sure, the midway, various games at the odds are stacked against you on and all of that stuff, cotton candy, Ferris wheels, etc. All that stuff I recognize, but the burlesque show, I don't so much recognize that.
Maybe you have to go to a different kind of carnival.
I guess so. I mean, probably the kinds that you were telling me about earlier when we were off camera.
Very funny.
I love the start of this movie. It's quiet. It shows Stacy's cold, calculating nature, and then she dumps that chump of a husband, or whatever he really is. I guess he is technically her husband, and takes his money and flies right out of town. I mean, it's a pretty fantastic start. We don't really get our soundtrack until she leaves in the cab, and it's a wonderful jazz soundtrack from Mundell Lowe, who had a long career as a band leader. Lowe grew up in Mississippi as the son of a preacher, and he started running away from home to play with bands as early as the age of 13, but his daddy always found him and would bring him back home to lecture him on the evils of drink and whiskey and so on and so forth. But by the age of 16, he was already working on the Grand Ole Opry radio program. So, you know, he had been around for a little while. But after serving in World War II, Lowe would work with a long list of who's who of jazz and big band musicians, as well as some pretty notable singers. He worked with Doc Severinsen, both Jimmy and Tommy Dorsey, Charlie Parker, Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, Miles Davis. I mean, the list goes on and on. And in the 60s, he found himself working on movies and television programs, and he worked on TV shows like Starsky and Hutch and Hawaii Five-O, and movies like this one, and even Billy Jack. He turned out to have a relative knack for scoring TV and movies. And to be honest with you, I really do believe scoring TV and movies is an art form all of its own. Just because you have to incorporate this other person's vision of something into your own style and provide music that doesn't just meet your standards, but the guy who did the directing, the editing, and then there's a third element, which is to elicit emotion from the audience. And then, you know, a movie like Satan in High Heels, you have this incredibly peppy and exciting score to go along with this very calculating and cunning Stacy. And on top of that, we met Grayson Hall as Peppy. And talk about a ball buster. I mean, Peppy and Stacy seen together has this contentiousness and almost a sexual energy to it. I wouldn't be all that surprised to learn that Peppy was intended to be a lesbian character. I mean, she's practically another male character in how she carries herself and in the way that she can go toe-to-toe with the other males in the club and the money guy in particular, as we'll see later on. And that's probably another thing to mention too. This was written in a time when everyone, you know, kind of has this veneer to them. They're all guarded, but know exactly what they want and seemingly know how to get it. I mean, these types of movies are so much fun to watch because, you know, everyone is just so rough and can stand their ground no matter how manly or feminine they are. And people say that what they mean, and they mean what they say. And that's always welcome in these kind of old-timey, these movies that just kind of have that chip on their shoulder and that attitude. All right, so let's get back to Satan in High Heels. Stacy is hired to sing at Pepe's club and has her eyes set on the wealthy owner Arthur, who just so happened to send his current lady friend away to Philadelphia so that he can kind of pick up on what Stacy is putting down, if you catch my drift. But we'll be back in a little bit. All right, so the plot is thickening at Pepe's nightclub where Arthur Kenyon, the owner of the club, is off on a vacation when his little playboy kind of fuck up of a son Larry arrives, and Stacy immediately decides to latch on to the young man. Not only that, but the club's other starlet, Sabrina, has arrived. Now, Sabrina is basically playing herself. She was a British model who was more or less modeled after every other blonde starlet popular at the time. She mostly got her acting start with playing ditzy roles on the BBC before rolling it into a minor film career. Do you want to know what Sabrina's biggest claim to fame is, though, Nurse Disembody?
What's that?
Well, it was her giant bazooms. She had a 42.5-inch bust. This movie, if you were able to add up her and Meg Miles' assets, come to a whopping 82.5 inches of baloombas. And that feels like that's got to be a world record of some sort, right? I mean, shouldn't that be a world record?
I think you need to get your mind out of the gutter, mister.
Whatever. Anyway, there was a BBC radio comedy show called The Goon Show that would pay lots of attention to Sabrina's bust by having references like, by the measurements of Sabrina and by the sweaters of Sabrina. I mean, no shit, her bosom was so famous, there are several references to her in some of the oddest places. For example, there was a jet fighter that had two large humps on the underside of it that the people in the Royal Air Force dubbed Sabrinas. In addition to that, a British firm that made trucks made a vehicle that had a protruding bonnet, and these vehicles were nicknamed Sabrinas because they had, you know, a little more in front. Sports cars that had extra rubber bumper blocks on the Dagmar bumpers, popular in the older days, were all noted to having Sabrinas on their bumpers, since the rubber on these blocks kind of stood out in front. I mean, don't get me wrong, nurse. I mean, boobs are a nice thing, but Sabrina's turned everyone into a 13-year-old boy who stumbled upon their friend's mom's Cosmo magazines during a sleepover. But let's get back to Satan in High Heels, and we'll see you at the end of the movie. Alright, and so goes the story of the pretty Stacy, the lovelorn father and son, and my favorite character in the whole damn movie, Peppy. Let's talk about Grayson Hall before we call it quits this week. Hall had a TV career before this movie, but after this, she kind of shot out like a rocket. 2 years after this movie came out, she was in The Night of the Iguana, and that's a kind of a big deal movie. It was directed by John Huston, one of the greats of film, and it's about a clergyman who is on a tour of the Mexican coast with a bunch of middle-aged Baptist ladies, but he's also having to come to terms with some failures in his life. Hall ended up getting nominated for Best Supporting Actress for the film. And considering that she was in a movie with Richard Burton, Ava Gardner, and Deborah Kerr, her standing out like that is one hell of an accomplishment. But after that, she appeared in Disney's That Darn Cat, which was also a huge hit. But then after that movie, she mostly returned to television parts, with the biggest role easily being Julia on 475 episodes of Dark Shadows. Now, she suffered from lung cancer, and considering her raspy, sandpapery voice and the fact that everyone is smoking like a goddamn chimney in this movie, that really probably shouldn't surprise anyone. She passed away in 1985, relatively young, like in her 60s. And I believe that all there is as a memorial to her is a small marker near where she lived that just has her name and the date that she passed. But to be honest with you guys, every scene that she's in this movie, I mean, she's stealing all of the thunder. As pretty and interesting as Meg Miles is, Hall is just not having it. And it's just so much fun watching the two of them work opposite one another. But you know, I really like this movie. It's sexploitation because it's a pretty young woman taking advantage of men around her and using her various wiles to get what she wants without any regard for who she might hurt. It fits in nicely with a lot of exploitation themes like narcissistic behavior of, well, likely women and a woman who knows exactly how to attract and use people. Stacy's definitely younger than Arthur and her doofus ex at the carnival, but seemingly so much older than Larry. And when you look at the Arthur and Larry, those two characters in particular, she drives one crazy because she can't be controlled, and drives the other one bonkers because she has all the control over him. It's fun, and it's maybe doesn't speak to the height of proper and realistic female characters, but it's definitely a lot of fun. But also, this movie doesn't work without Meg Miles. What's so great about this is how she makes these small little glances or turns the corners of her lips up into a sinister grin. Or, you know, just frankly how she slinks around a room. We first see her as a burlesque dancer, so okay, we get it. She's good at using her form to get things, but Apparently, she also sings, but we get very little of that. We go through a whole movie about how great of a star she is without actually seeing too much of why everyone thinks she will be a star. But it all leads to that song, The Female of the Species, that ends up working out as a great lead up for the climax of the movie. Because we have to wait for her opening night, we need Miles to manipulate us like she does everyone else, and damn it, it works. But Nurse Disembody, did this movie remind you of the times that you performed at nightclubs singing sultry lounge songs while wearing bustiers and such?
A little bit. I will always remember those mistakes I made with that poor guy and his father. I mean, never mind.
Yikes. Okay, well, let's tell people where they can get all the B-Movie Enema business.
You can find all of Jeff's writings and upcoming episodes at www.bmovieenema.com. You can follow the page at Facebook and Twitter and check out episodes on YouTube. If you have a Roku, get OtherWorlds TV and check him out along with all the other hosts that appear there on weekends.
Thanks, Nurse. I kind of feel like I feel like you and I need to, maybe discuss some things after this episode. I mean, things got a little weird this week. Anyway, see you guys.